Welcome to part 4 of the lecture videos on global marketing. And in this part, the fourth part, we're going to talk about price. And there's a couple of key concepts here that are very important. I want to talk about them in your pricing strategy. Of course, that's obviously a very important part of marketing, and there's a lot of sophisticated analysis that can go into this. But I want to focus on just a couple of key concepts: price discrimination and strategic pricing. And then I want to end this segment on pricing to talk about ways you can get in trouble with pricing, right? A lot of very common mistakes that some executives have made and actually gotten to over the line, broken the law, in fact, in some cases. And it can be easy to do. And so I want to give you some talk to you just a little bit about how to avoid that. But let's talk first about some effective strategies for pricing that companies use internationally. So price discrimination is simply charging customers in different countries different prices for the same product. So for this to work, you've got to be able to keep the national markets separate. It says avoid arbitrage situations. What that means is you don't want people, if the two neighboring countries, you've got one very high price in one country, a very low price in the other country. Maybe there's very high income consumers in the country here and very low income consumers in the other country. You want to avoid the situation where people can buy the product at the very low price, just take it over the border, right? It's very easy for them to get to the other country and then sell it at the higher price or maybe a little bit less than the price you're charging. And next thing you know, you're not selling anything in the high price country, right? So that's what we're talking about there. So that's something that can be tricky if you're having these different prices in different countries. The other thing to notice, and this very interesting, strangely worded concept that economists love to talk about, is the price elasticities of demand. So to use this kind of strategy where you're charging different prices in different countries for a product, the same product, obviously, to do that, you would need different price elasticities of demand in different countries. So let's talk about this interesting concept of price elasticity of demand. And so this just means how responsive demand is to a change in price. So we would say that demand is elastic when just a small change in the price, you just drop the price for a product a little bit, results in a very large increase in demand. So there's really a lot of elasticity in demand for that price elasticity of demand. Demand is inelastic when a large change in price, you drop the price significantly, or you increase the price significantly, and it really doesn't affect demand that much, right? And so I think we see this kind of thing happen in some instances. A famous example of a situation of the inelasticity, right, when demand is inelastic, is something like gasoline, right? And we see that sometimes even if gas prices shoot up, people still have to have their gas. They'll stand in line, right? They'll wait in line in their cars for hours, right, just to get gas. So that's a clear example where a change in price doesn't seem to have that much impact on demand. And so you can imagine other situations, some kind of luxury good, and that people really, it's just a little bit too expensive, but then you change the price, you lower the price, and people would suddenly want to buy more of that. So this is the kind of thing, this price elasticity of demand that everyone needs to think about if you're, for your kind of product and your pricing strategy, the price elasticity of demand for that product. Strategic pricing has three aspects. And we can talk about each one of these in turn: predatory pricing, multi-point pricing, and experience curve pricing. We've already talked a little bit about experience curve, but let's talk about this predatory pricing. And so this is a strategy that some big multinational companies use. And again, all of these strategies I'm talking about now tend to be most effective for big, giant companies, multinational firms, not small entrepreneurial ventures, that it may not work as effectively in that case. But predatory pricing is something that managers sometimes will use. They'll say, look, here's what we're going to do. We're a big multinational company. We have operations in multiple countries. So what we're going to do is we're doing really well in our product in this one market. There's a huge increase in demand no matter what we do. Maybe there's, you know, a lot of elasticity demand. There's we lower the price a little bit and they're just buying it like crazy. And so we're making big profits. And so what we can find is that the profits we make in that one market are going to allow us, we're in another country where maybe people haven't noticed our product yet, they haven't even paid attention to it, they're not buying it. So that could allow us to keep the price really low in that other market. And that could be so effective. Now there's a limit, right? How low you go. You don't want to sell below the cost of production. We're going to talk about that. That gets you into a problem of dumping. We're going to talk about that. But you could then, if you're doing really well and making a big profit in one market, you could keep the price lower in other markets as a way to kind of compete more effectively. You could even drive out your competitors out of the market. They could say, we can't compete at that price. We're not making a high enough profit. So that's something that big multinational companies are sometimes able to do. Now, another thing that is a very effective strategy at times and can work is this multi-point pricing. And this is what you can see. Sometimes you'll see that a company, you know, a price that it's selling a product at in one market may have an impact on, you know, one of their competitors in another market. So you know, you have very aggressive pricing in one market, and a company in another country, another market could say, well, we're going to compete, we're going to have very low prices in another country. And so this might, you know, allow you to say, okay, so we're going to have a very careful strategy here because we don't want to set off our rivals on this kind of bidding war. So what we could do is we're going to make sure that we're very careful how we price whatever it is we're selling. We might sell at a very low price in some markets and not expect any kind of response from that, from our competitors, but it could mean a huge increase in demand if there's a, you know, elastic demand for that product. So these are the kinds of things that are relevant in these kinds of decisions. And so these are some of the interesting concepts. But I think what we've also talked about already is experience curve pricing. And so this is the very interesting phenomenon that we've seen where if a company is producing a product in one factory of very large volumes, you can start taking advantage of the economies of scale. The company can start taking advantage of the learning curve effects of producing this product again and again, learning how to do it more efficiently at lower cost. And so those two aspects, the economies of scale and the learning curve, that's what the experience curve is. And so when a company is really able to reduce its cost that significantly, that could mean it could reduce its price and still keep a very nice profit. And so that really could create a great opportunity for a company to sell at a very competitive, low price, compete very effectively in markets, gain market share by taking advantage of the experience curve. And the experience curve can help you reduce costs so much you can also reduce prices. And so that's what we're talking about here with this concept of experience curve pricing. So if your competitors say, we give up, we can't compete, they're so effective, the price is so low, we can't produce at that low cost and make any kind of profit, you might actually drive some of your competitors out of the market, and then you can increase your your prices and your profits later. So these are just some interesting techniques. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about, though, is be careful. When it comes to pricing, there's some ways that sometimes international managers get themselves into trouble. And one of these ways, if they're very competitive, they're very aggressive, trying to keep the prices very low, sometimes companies can get into this issue of dumping. And so this is when they are selling below the cost of production, or it could even be below the home market price. Now, in some cases, you can do that. But the key thing here is selling below the cost of production. Now, if you're selling below the cost of production, that means you're losing money, right? And you might say, well, why would a company do that? And the reason they do that is so they can, you know, lose money in that market. They're selling below the cost of production. They're losing money, but they're driving out the competition because the competition says, okay, this isn't just competitive pricing. This is really significantly low pricing that we can't even produce at that cost. Nobody can compete with a company doing that. right? This is really an unfair tactic because it drives out the competition in an unfair way. It wasn't that you were just so efficient, you were using experience curve pricing, you finally were able to get the cost down to such an extent you can lower the price. You're just lowering the price to drive out the competition. And so that is an unfair tactic, and so you can get into trouble with that. There are laws against this. There are international trade laws that deal with this. In fact, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, Article 6, specifically deals with dumping. And most countries have some kind of anti-dumping laws. The United States does have its own laws like that. And so you could find yourself, if you're selling below the cost of production in another country's market, you actually could get in trouble with anti-dumping and face tariffs, taxes on your imports, right? Or taxes on your products. So that's where you can get into really serious trouble, and it can become a legal issue. And in some cases, some countries will even say, we don't want you to sell what you're selling it in the home market because that would mean that you're selling it at such a significant loss that this is dumping. So this is why this is something you want to avoid. And the key thing to remember is never sell below the cost of production. You can find yourself susceptible to anti-dumping duties. And that's when a country will impose increased import taxes on you, and you'll find that it's very difficult now to sell your product in there because they realize what you're doing, you're dumping, and they will take action. Now, another sort of interesting aspect of this, a different concept, is this price fixing. And so this is when companies will get together, maybe there's just 3 competitors in a given market, and they will say, you know what, we could all, if we collaborate with each other, if we cooperate with each other, you know, we're all selling basically the same product. You know, if we could, instead of competing with each other, if we all agree to sell at a very high price, we're the only ones that are selling this product. The consumers are going to have to buy it from one of us. We're all going to make a lot more money. If we agree, we're not going to compete with each other on price and keep the prices low. Let's all increase the prices to one high level. And then everyone will have to buy it from at least one of us, and we'll all be able to compete at this exact same price and make lots of money. We'll gouge the consumers, right? And so countries have laws against this, right? This is, there's very serious laws against this. There's policies called competition policies, antitrust policies. And companies that do this price fixing can get into serious trouble. I had one of my former students, and I won't mention the company, I won't mention the country, but he was an international graduate student, and he was supposed to come for one of our modules in the United States. And I said, where is he? How come he didn't come? Oh, well, he got this little issue with price fixing. The U.S. Department of Justice, you know, said we're going to make sure he doesn't get a visa to come in to the United States because we would like to arrest him. So these are the kinds of things that you want to avoid getting into those kinds of trouble. So that's what I wanted to say about pricing, and now we can talk about the mini cases.